Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend a few minutes with The Leftovers by Tom Perrotta. This book was originally published in 2011 and it was adapted into an HBO series called The Leftovers and that ran from 2014 to 2017. And I have watched that series. I watched the series before I read the book, and it's quite a bit different. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But The Leftovers is about, let's see, I would guess I would kind of classify this maybe as, well, I've seen it actually classified as post-apocalyptic. I don't think I would go that far, but it is a work of fiction that is set in a time when something dramatic has happened to the world. And that event was called the sudden departure. And the sudden departure was just this random day where everything was normal, but suddenly, I forgot, like an X amount of percent of the population just disappears. So it's sort of like a rapture type event, from Christianity. But there's no rhyme or reason to who disappears. Some families are impacted quite a bit, and others aren't impacted at all. And so our story is actually set in a small town called Mapleton. That's sort of this idealistic town, but of course, it's been impacted just like everywhere else. And so we focus on one family. So this is kind of good because we get all different kind of reactions because people are reacting to this in all different kinds of ways. It would be quite a psychological jolt to have an event like this happen. There is a quote here that sort of illustrates this. It says, "There also weren't any bad guys to hate, which made everything that much harder to get into focus." Because if you have something happen, like, for example, that makes me think of 9/11 here in the US, where there was this big terrorist attack, but it was focused, right? There was a set of people who did the act, and there was the reaction to that. This event, there is no one to blame, there is no one to hate, so therefore people have different reactions. So the Garvey family is the family that we're focusing on here, and Kevin Garvey is the dad. He's a businessman in town. He eventually does run for mayor, and his sort of coping mechanism is to try to return to a sense of normalcy. So whenever he becomes the mayor, he thinks it's a good idea to have things like community events and socials and dances and things like that, because this is how some people react to stress, right? It's just to get into a routine and get back to normal as quick as you possibly can. But a lot of people don't want to do that. Namely, Kevin's wife, Laurie, she actually cannot seem to cope, so she actually gets involved with a cult. So there is this cult called the Guilty Remnant that has sprung up, and it is this cult that sort of it's a cult of silence. It is they live together in houses, and they sort of have, there's a big presence of the guilty remnant there in Mapleton, in this relatively small town. But Laurie ends up joining that. So the guilty remnant, they chain smoke, they don't speak, as I mentioned, they actually embrace the meaninglessness of life. They have a nihilistic sort of worldview where nothing matters. There is a quote, the guilty remnant actually show up at this community event, and they spell out this sign, and it says, this quote says, "Together the jagged row of letters spelled the words, 'Stop wasting your breath.'" This is from the guilty remnant who chain smoke because life is meaningless, so it doesn't matter. So that's why I think that that's my interpretation of why they chain smoke. But they have this idea that nothing matters. So then the Garveys have a couple of kids. One of their daughter is named Jill. She's in high school. Her best friend is named Amy, who also is a relatively important character, I would say, in the book. But Jill, her and her high school friend, Jill has had one of her friends from high school disappear. Jill, but though recognizes that she's remembering her friend that has disappeared a little bit differently. They had already started to grow apart, but yet whenever Jen, her friend's name is Jen, disappeared, Jill has this idea of her more, it's kind of idealized. And Jill's has a quote here about that I think is pretty pertinent to that sort of idea. And it says, "It wasn't until her mother joined the GR, the Guilty Remnant, that Jill began to understand for herself how absence could warp the mind, make you exaggerate the virtues and minimize the defects of the missing individual. It wasn't it wasn't the same, of course. Her mother wasn't gone, not like Jen, her friend, but it didn't seem to matter." Because, I think that's true. When someone disappears out of your life, like passes away, there is this tendency to sort of forget all of the negativity or anything negative about the person and really just remember the good things about that person. I think that's a very human kind of reaction. So they also have a son whose name is Tom. He is away, so he doesn't live with the family. He's a little bit older, and he's bouncing around into a couple of different other cults that have formed around the country. One is called the Holy Wayne movement, which is he's mainly involved with. Holy Wayne is this character who um, finds that he has the power to heal people's pain through hugs. So it's sort of like that idea of bearing one another's burdens. So he comes and he takes the pain from others. He seems to, it's sort of ambiguous if he's actually able to do this, but the people that he comes in contact with definitely thinks that it works. There is this idea that maybe it is working. Maybe there's something there that we don't know. So I'll talk more about that here in a bit as well. Other main characters of the book is Nora, is a woman in town. She sort of becomes a local celebrity because her entire family disappeared during the sudden departure. So I think her husband and two kids. And so her coping mechanism is really she actually kind of focuses on the past. She seems to go back to the past a lot. She watches SpongeBob. That was kind of cool. She comes across SpongeBob the cartoon, and she uh, ends up buying all the DVDs for all the episodes, and she just watches that. That's her kind of like her comfort go to, and so that sort of reminded me how cultural things like SpongeBob can actually be this sort of rock that people can cling to in times of distress. So yeah, a couple of other characters I did want to mention. One is the pastor. He has a relatively small role in the book, much bigger role in the series. The pastor, there's this reverend who he actually goes and he researches the people who've disappeared, who disappeared during the sudden departure, and then he finds all the dirt on them and then he publishes it. So this actually happens with Nora's husband, where he uncovers the fact that Nora's husband had been having an affair. Nora had actually been idealizing her relationship with her family, sort of like Jill had done with her relationship with Jen, until the pastor brings this up, and it becomes public. But this is a mechanism, coping mechanism from the pastor who doesn't know why he wasn't chosen to go. He's looking at it through the lens of those who were disappeared in the sudden departure were special somehow, and they got taken somewhere good, sort of like a heaven. And he's like, I'm good. Why wasn't I taken? So yeah, that's his sort of coping mechanism. And then the other character that's pretty minor actually in the book is the director of the cult, the Guilty Remnant cult, and that is Patty Levin. She has a big role in the series, which I really liked, but she has a pretty small role here an important role though in the book. So just a couple of over big themes that I took away from the book. Really, the main theme that I took away from the book was the power of fate. Fate, like this sort of event, can happen this is sort of like a metaphor, right? But these sorts of events that just you're making breakfast one day and something huge happens. This is what happened with Nora. I think she was making lunch or breakfast or something, and she turned around and her family was gone. That's a dramatic portrayal, but nevertheless, fate is present in our lives and it's uncontrollable and it's unpredictable. And so, how we deal with the actions of fate that fate throws at us really is what makes us us, right? And so I thought that was pretty cool. Um, yeah, the other thing sort of about the difference between the book and the series, after reading the book now, I can see the series really goes over the top. It really goes big. The series is fun, so I enjoyed it. It's not really that tied to the book, although I could see after reading the book, I could see how there was an extrapolation and it's plausible, right? Although it does go in some very different directions than the book. Okay, I think that is everything that I would like to say about The Leftovers. I enjoyed reading this a lot. I really was curious how the book might be different than the series, and I actually think I prefer the book, which is not uncommon for me. But nevertheless, they're both pretty enjoyable. Okay, I think I'll leave this chat here, and I will have another chat coming up fairly soon. So until next time, take care.